Captain John Miller stood on the bridge of the U.S. Defiant, his eyes fixed on the main screen. The stars looked peaceful, but he knew that wouldn't last. His fingers tapped nervously on the arm of his command chair as he waited for confirmation. "Captain, incoming message from Earth Command," said Frank Johnson, his communications officer. "Priority 1. Miller nodded. "Put it through." The stern face of Admiral Peter Garcia filled the screen. "Captain Miller, our deep space sensors have detected a large fleet entering the solar system. They're not responding to hails and are moving directly toward Earth." Miller's heart raced, but his voice remained steady. "How many ships, Admiral?" "Over 200, Captain. And they're like nothing we've ever seen before." The Admiral's face showed worry that he couldn't hide. "The Defiant is our most advanced ship. You need to intercept and assess while we prepare our defenses." The screen went dark. Miller turned to his crew, their faces showing a mix of fear and determination. "Susan, set course to intercept." "Alan, I want the engines at full capacity. We need to get there fast." Lieutenant Susan Ward, a woman with sharp eyes and quick hands, plotted the course while Chief Engineer Alan Ross spoke through the comm system. "The new engines are untested at full power, Captain, but I'll make it work." The Defiant moved faster than any human ship before it, racing to meet the unknown threat. As they approached, the sensors began to pick up details of the alien fleet. "Captain, I'm seeing energy readings that match descriptions from the Centauri reports," said Susan, her voice tight. "These appear to be Zarkonian ships." Miller had heard of the Zarkonians. Everyone had. An empire that spanned hundreds of star systems, known for conquering less advanced worlds. Earth had only begun space exploration 30 years ago. Against the Zarkonians, they were children facing giants. "Open a channel," Miller ordered. "All frequencies." He stood tall, straightened his uniform, and spoke clearly. "This is Captain John Miller of the Earth ship Defiant. Our world comes in peace. We request communication." The response came in the form of a bright beam of energy that narrowly missed the Defiant, heating the hull as it passed. "Evasive maneuvers," Miller shouted as more beams cut through space around them. Susan's hands flew over the controls, and the Defiant danced between the deadly beams, using its smaller size as an advantage against the massive Zarkonian ships. "Return fire. Target their lead vessel," Miller commanded. The Defiant's experimental weapons lashed out, striking the nearest Zarkonian ship. The alien vessel shuddered but remained operational. "Captain," Alan called over the comm, "I'm noticing something strange about their energy signatures. Their ships seem to be operating on the same frequency, almost like they're sharing power somehow." Miller barely had time to process this information before 3 more energy beams converged on their position. Susan managed to avoid a direct hit, but the ship rocked violently as one beam grazed their shields. "Shields at 60%, Frank reported. "We can't take much more of this," Susan added. "There are too many of them." Miller made a quick decision. "Send a message to Earth Command. Warn them that the Zarkonians are hostile and coming in force. Then plot a course that will lead some of these ships away from Earth. We need to buy time for evacuations to begin." As the Defiant sped away, a dozen Zarkonian ships followed, just as Miller had hoped. From his command chair, he watched the tactical display as the alien fleet split, most continuing toward Earth, but enough following the Defiant to slightly delay the invasion. "They've taken the bait," Susan said. Miller nodded grimly. "For now. But we'll need more than clever tricks to stop them." He turned to Alan. "That energy signature you mentioned, could it be important?" Alan's eyes lit up with the spark of an idea. "It might be, Captain. It just might be the key to everything." As the Defiant raced toward the outer planets with Zarkonian ships in pursuit, Miller knew they had found the first thread of hope, thin as it was. In what seemed like an impossible battle, the U.S. Defiant limped into the hidden asteroid base named Outpost 7. The ship's hull showed burn marks from Zarkonian weapons. Captain Miller ordered immediate repairs as they hit among the large rocks in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. "How long until we're operational again?" Miller asked, walking into the engine room. Alan Ross wiped sweat from his forehead. 6 hours for basic systems. The shields took a real beating, Captain. Miller nodded, concerned. "We don't have much time. The main Zarkonian fleet will reach Earth in less than 2 days." Dr. Lisa Collins, the ship's science officer, approached them with a datapad. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but excitement showed in her face. "Captain, I've been analyzing the battle data," she said, showing him the screen. Alan was right about the energy signatures. The Zarkonian ships all operate on the same quantum frequency. Miller looked at the complex graphs, not understanding what he saw. "What does that mean for us?" Lisa pointed to matching wave patterns. "They use this frequency network to coordinate attacks and shield systems. It's why they're so effective in large numbers. It's like they're all parts of one big ship instead of separate vessels." Alan stepped closer, studying the data. "That's their strength, but it could also be their weakness." He looked up with a spark of hope in his tired eyes. "If we could disrupt that frequency, we might affect their entire fleet at once." Lisa finished his thought. Miller felt the first real hope since the battle began. "How would we do that?" "I have an idea," Alan said, turning to Frank Johnson, who had just entered the engine room. "Frank, remember that quantum communication project we worked on last year?" Frank nodded. "The one that failed because the signal kept cascading out of control." "Exactly." Alan smiled. "What if we repurpose that technology? Create a quantum disruptor that targets their specific frequency?" Lisa's eyes widened. A cascading effect across their entire network. It could work. For the next 4 hours, Alan and Frank worked to modify the ship's experimental phase cannon, while Lisa calculated the exact frequency needed. The rest of the crew repaired what they could and prepared for another confrontation. Miller received grim reports from Earth. The Zarkonian fleet had begun its attack. Cities were being destroyed. Millions had already died. The remaining Earth ships fought bravely, but were being quickly overwhelmed. "Captain," Susan called from her station on the bridge, "we're receiving a message from Admiral Garcia." The Admiral's face appeared on screen, smoke and sparks visible behind him. "Captain Miller, Earth Defense Headquarters has fallen. Our main fleet is destroyed." His voice was strained. "Whatever you're planning, do it soon. We can't hold out much longer." Miller clenched his fists. "We're coming." "Admiral, just hold on." The transmission ended abruptly. Miller turned to find Alan, Frank, and Lisa standing at the entrance to the bridge. "The quantum disruptor is ready," Alan said, "but there's a problem." Lisa stepped forward. "We need to get very close to their command ship to deploy it effectively. The closer we are to the center of their network, the stronger the cascade effect will be." "How close?" Miller asked. "Practically on top of them," Frank admitted. "Point-blank range." Miller looked around at his crew. They had already survived one impossible encounter. Now they needed to fly directly into the heart of the enemy fleet. "There's more," Alan added quietly. "The disruptor will release an energy pulse that could damage our own systems. We might not be able to escape after we trigger it." A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Everyone understood what this meant. It was likely a one-way mission. Miller stood tall. "I won't order anyone to go. This is volunteer only." Susan stood from her station. "Earth is our home. We all volunteer." One by one, every crew member nodded in agreement. Miller felt pride swell in his chest. "Then let's prep for launch. We have a fleet to destroy and a planet to save." As the Defiant powered up its engines, Miller looked at the asteroid field that had hidden them. It would be the last safe place they'd see. Everything ahead was danger and possibly death. But for the first time, they had a plan that might actually work. The next 6 hours aboard the U.S. Defiant were a blur of activity. Every crew member worked without rest, knowing that each minute mattered. Earth was burning, and they carried its last hope. Captain Miller gathered his officers in the tactical room. A holographic display showed the massive Zarkonian fleet surrounding Earth. "Here's what we know," Miller said, pointing to a larger ship at the center of the alien formation. "This is their command vessel. According to Lisa's analysis, it's the primary hub for their quantum network." Lisa nodded. "The network spreads outward from there, connecting every ship. If we can disrupt it at the source, the effect should cascade through their entire fleet. But getting to it won't be easy," Susan added. She manipulated the display to show the layers of Zarkonian ships protecting the command vessel. "We'll need to get through all of these defenses." Security Chief Nancy Bell, a tough woman with short red hair, studied the display. "A direct approach would be suicide." "That's why we won't go direct," Susan replied. She zoomed the display out to show the whole Earth-Moon system. "I've plotted a stealth approach. We can use the Moon's gravity to slingshot us into this debris field from their earlier attacks. With minimal power, we might slip through undetected." Miller looked at the path she proposed. It was risky but possible. "How close can this get us?" "Within 5 kilometers of the command ship," Susan answered. "Close enough for our plan." Ellen stepped forward. "The quantum disruptor is installed, but there's a complication. Our calculations show we need to place additional disruptor nodes directly on their command ship to maximize the effect." Nancy straightened her back. "That means a boarding party." "Exactly," Alan confirmed. "Small teams placing disruptor nodes at these 3 points." He highlighted locations on the holographic command ship. Frank pulled up another image. "We intercepted their communications and found this. Schematics of a Zarkonian shuttle. I think we can modify our auxiliary craft to mimic its signature." Miller absorbed all this information. The plan was coming together, but each piece was dangerous and precisely timed. "Once we're in position," Lisa explained, "we'll activate the main disruptor on the Defiant while the boarding party triggers the nodes. The combined effect should create a feedback loop in their network." "And what happens then?" Miller asked. Lisa hesitated. "Best case, their weapons and shields fail. Worst case," she shrugged, "we really don't know. This is untested technology against an alien system." Nancy began organizing the boarding teams, selecting crew members with combat experience. She ran them through rapid training exercises using the limited information they had about Zarkonian ship layouts. "Remember," Nancy told her teams, "Zarkonians are insectoid. Their corridors are taller and narrower than ours. Their atmosphere is similar enough to breathe, but gravity is slightly stronger. Adjust your movements accordingly." In the engine room, Alan and Frank made final adjustments to the quantum disruptor. The device hummed with power, its core glowing with an unsettling blue light. "If this works," Frank said quietly, "it will change everything we know about warfare in space." Ellen nodded. "If we survive to tell anyone about it." On the bridge, Miller received another transmission from Earth. This one wasn't from military command, but from a civilian broadcast. It showed cities in ruins, people fleeing, Zarkonian ships firing from above. The message cut out abruptly. Miller turned to find Susan watching the screen, tears in her eyes. "My family is in Boston," she said softly. Miller put a hand on her shoulder. "We're going to stop this, Susan, no matter what it takes." The final hour before launch was spent in personal ways. Some crew members recorded messages for loved ones. Others sat in quiet contemplation. A few tried to sleep, knowing it might be their last chance. Miller walked through the ship, speaking briefly with each crew member, offering encouragement and thanks. When he returned to the bridge, his officers were waiting, ready at their stations. "All preparations are complete, Captain," Susan reported. "The boarding teams are standing by." Miller took his seat. "Then let's bring the fight to them." Launch the Defiant. The U.S. Defiant moved silently through space, all non-essential systems shut down to avoid detection. Captain Miller watched the main screen as Jupiter grew larger. They would use the gas giant's gravity to slingshot them toward Earth at increased speed. Approaching optimal position, Susan said quietly, as if the Zarkonians might hear them through the vacuum of space. Execute slingshot maneuver, Miller ordered. The ship curved around Jupiter's massive form, picking up speed. The force pushed the crew back into their seats as the Defiant shot forward like a bullet. Sensor analysis shows the Zarkonian fleet is rotating their sensor grid for recalibration. Lisa reported, "We'll have a 30-second window where their detection capability will be reduced." Miller nodded. "That's our opening. Susan, time our approach to hit that window." The tension on the bridge was thick enough to cut with a knife. If their timing was off by even a few seconds, they would be spotted immediately. Window opens in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now. Lisa called. The Defiant surged forward at full speed, racing through the gap in the Zarkonian sensor net. They passed within kilometers of enemy ships, close enough to see the details of their strange biomechanical designs through the viewports. "We're through," Susan announced with relief, approaching the debris field near Earth orbit. The view outside was heartbreaking. Destroyed Earth ships and stations floated in pieces, creating a cloud of wreckage. Miller forced himself to focus on the mission instead of the destruction of humanity's space fleet. "Reduce speed and maintain course through the debris. Use it for cover," he ordered. As they weaved through the wreckage, the massive Zarkonian command ship came into view. It was shaped like a giant flattened oval, with spikes extending from all sides, 10 times larger than the Defiant. "We're in position," Susan reported, 5 kilometers from target. Miller turned to Nancy. "Boarding team status." "Ready in the launch bay, Captain," she replied. "The shuttle has been modified to match Zarkonian signatures." "It's time," Miller said. "Launch when ready." In the ship's bay, Nancy led Lieutenant Susan Ward, Engineer Alan Ross, and 2 security officers into the modified shuttle. They had painted it with the same strange green-black color as Zarkonian ships and adjusted its energy signature to match their vessels. "Remember," Nancy told her team as the bay doors opened, "we placed the disruptor nodes at these 3 junction points. Quick and quiet until we're spotted, then move fast." The shuttle launched, small and seemingly insignificant against the backdrop of destroyed ships. It approached the command vessel, transmitting the copied Zarkonian identification codes that Frank had extracted from their communications. "They're accepting our codes," Susan whispered, as if afraid to jinx their luck. The shuttle slipped into one of the many docking bays on the massive command ship. As they landed, they could see insectoid Zarkonians moving about the bay, their multiple limbs working on ships and equipment. "Atmosphere is breathable," Alan confirmed, checking the readings. "Gravity at 1.2 Earth normal." Nancy adjusted her weapon. "Masks on. Move on my signal." They pulled on face masks that would hide their human features at a glance and exited the shuttle in formation. They walked with purpose, as if they belonged there. Surprisingly, the Zarkonians barely glanced at them, perhaps mistaking them for members of some subjugated species that served the Empire. The team made their way deeper into the ship, following the schematics Frank had pieced together from intercepted communications. The corridors were tall and narrow, filled with strange smells and sounds. They reached the first junction point without incident. Alan quickly attached a disruptor node to the wall panel and activated it. The small device glowed faintly as it synchronized with the ship's systems. "1 down, 2 to go," he whispered. Back on the Defiant, Miller and Lisa monitored the boarding team's progress using the trackers in their suits. "They've placed the first node," Lisa reported. Suddenly, alarms blared on the bridge. "Captain, we've been detected," Frank shouted. "A Zarkonian patrol ship just changed course toward us." Miller's decision was instant. "Battle stations. We need to keep them distracted while the boarding team completes their mission." The Defiant's weapons powered up as the ship moved to intercept the approaching patrol. The element of surprise was gone. Now it was a race against time. Alarms screamed throughout the Zarkonian command ship. The boarding team froze as insectoid warriors began rushing through the corridors. "They've spotted the Defiant," Nancy said, checking her communicator. "Our cover won't last much longer." Susan pointed down a side passage. "Second junction is this way. We need to move faster." They ran through the narrow corridors, no longer concerned with looking like they belonged. They turned a corner and came face to face with 3 Zarkonian warriors, each nearly 7 feet tall with multiple arms holding weapons. Nancy fired first, her weapon sending out a pulse that dropped the lead warrior. The other 2 returned fire, forcing the team back around the corner. "We don't have time for this," Alan said, pulling a small device from his pack. He tossed it around the corner and covered his ears. The flashbang exploded with a deafening roar, temporarily disorienting the Zarkonians. The team rushed past them, Alan pausing just long enough to attach the second disruptor node to a wall panel. 2 down, he confirmed. Back on the Defiant, Miller was fighting a desperate battle. The patrol ship had called for reinforcements, and now 3 Zarkonian vessels were firing on them. "Shields at 40%, Frank called out as the ship shook from another hit. Miller gripped his chair. "Evasive pattern Delta. Fire all weapons at the lid ship." The Defiant twisted between enemy fire, its experimental weapons striking back with surprising force. 1 Zarkonian ship exploded, but 2 more took its place. "Life support failing on decks 3 and 4, Lisa reported. "Hull breach in Section 7. "Seal it off," Miller ordered. "Redirect power to shields." Inside the command ship, the boarding team fought their way toward the final junction point. They were surrounded, taking fire from both ends of a long corridor. "We'll never make it through," Susan said, firing back at the approaching warriors. Nancy looked at her team, then at the junction point visible at the far end of the corridor. She made a quick decision. "You 2 go around through that maintenance shaft." She pointed to a small opening in the wall. "I'll keep them busy here." Alan shook his head. "That's suicide, Nancy." She smiled grimly. "Just make sure this works." She pulled out extra ammunition. "Now go." Susan and Alan reluctantly entered the maintenance shaft, while Nancy provided covering fire. They crawled through the tight space, hearing the sounds of intense fighting behind them. When they reached the 3rd junction point, the ship shook violently. More Zarkonian ships had joined the attack on the Defiant. "Hurry," Susan urged as Alan attached the final node. "It's done," he said. "Let's get back to the shuttle." They made their way toward the docking bay, but found it overrun with Zarkonian warriors. There was no way to reach their shuttle. "We need another way out," Susan said. Alan pointed to a communication panel. "Let me contact the Defiant." On the bridge, Miller received their transmission. "Captain, we've placed all 3 nodes, but we're cut off from our shuttle." "Understood," Miller replied. "Stand by for extraction plan." But the Defiant was in no position to help. The ship had taken heavy damage, with multiple systems failing and casualties mounting. Lisa studied the readings from the disruptor nodes. "Captain, the nodes are active, but they need to be synchronized with our main disruptor. The connection isn't strong enough." "Can we boost the signal?" Miller asked. Lisa shook her head. "Not from this distance. Someone would need to create a direct power link from our core to the disruptor array." Frank looked up from his station. "The connection would have to go through the radiation chamber. No one could survive that level of exposure." Lisa stared at the schematics for a long moment, then stood up. "I can do it. The synchronization only needs to hold for 30 seconds. Before Miller could respond, she rushed from the bridge. He called after her, but another hit rocked the ship, throwing him back into his chair. Lisa reached the engine room and sealed the door behind her. She began connecting power cables directly from the core to the disruptor controls, her hands working quickly. "Beginning synchronization," she reported over the comm. "Lisa, wait," Miller called out. "There has to be another way." "There isn't, John," she replied, using his first name for the first time. The nodes are placed. This is our only shot. She took a deep breath as she finished the connections. Synchronization complete in 3, 2, 1. A blinding light filled the radiation chamber as Lisa activated the final sequence, her silhouette visible for just a moment before the cameras failed. A wave of energy pulsed from the Defiant's core, invisible to the naked eye, but powerful beyond measure. The quantum disruptor activated, sending its signal to the 3 nodes planted within the Zarkonian command ship. On the bridge, Miller watched in stunned silence as Lisa's life signs flatlined on the monitor. There was no time to mourn. The ship shuddered as another Zarkonian blast struck their weakened shields. "Captain," Frank called out, his voice rising with excitement. "Something's happening to the Zarkonian ships." The main screen showed the nearest enemy vessels beginning to flicker and drift. Their weapons powered down mid-charge, and their shields wavered like ripples on water. "It's working," Miller whispered. Then louder, "It's working." The disruptor is affecting their systems. Inside the Zarkonian command ship, Susan and Alan watched in amazement as the lights flickered and the insectoid warriors around them suddenly became disoriented. Some dropped their weapons, while others began making strange clicking sounds to each other in apparent confusion. "The nodes are active," Alan said, checking his handheld device. "The cascade effect is spreading through their network." Susan pointed to a nearby window. Outside, Zarkonian ships were drifting out of formation, some colliding with each other as their navigation systems failed. "We need to get back to the Defiant," she said. Alan nodded toward an emergency pod bay they had passed earlier. "Those might work." They ran through the increasingly chaotic corridors of the command ship, passing confused Zarkonians who barely noticed them now. They reached the pod bay and climbed into one of the alien escape vessels. "I hope these controls are as simple as they look," Alan said as he studied the panel. Back on the Defiant, Miller made a bold decision. "Susan and Alan are still out there," he told his remaining bridge crew, "and the disruptor effect won't last forever. We need to strike now, while the Zarkonians are vulnerable." Frank looked up from his console. "Sir, we've lost 30% of the crew. Half our weapons are offline. The ship can barely move." Miller stood tall. "Then we'll use what we have left. Plot a course straight through the heart of their fleet. Target any ship that still has power with everything we've got." The damaged Defiant began to move, its engines straining as it accelerated toward the disoriented Zarkonian fleet. Miller watched as ship after ship drifted helplessly before them. "Fire at will," he ordered. The Defiant's remaining weapons struck with precision, targeting engine cores and weapon systems on the few ships that still showed signs of functioning. With each hit, massive explosions rippled through the enemy vessels. But something unexpected was happening. As one Zarkonian ship exploded, the energy release seemed to intensify the quantum disruption. That ship's destruction caused systems on nearby ships to fail completely. "Captain," Frank called out, "the cascade effect is growing stronger. It's spreading faster than we predicted." Miller watched in amazement as Zarkonian ships began firing on each other, their targeting systems identifying friendly vessels as enemies. Other ships simply shut down completely, their cores going critical and detonating in brilliant flashes. What had begun as a simple disruption had become a catastrophic failure cascading throughout the entire fleet. Ship after ship exploded, each detonation accelerating the effect on the surrounding vessels. In their escape pod, Susan and Alan watched the destruction in awe as they navigated toward the Defiant. "It's like dominoes," Susan whispered, each failure triggering more failures. The massive command ship behind them began to break apart, huge sections tearing away as internal explosions rippled through its structure. The quantum nodes they had planted were at the heart of the cascade, turning the command ship into the epicenter of destruction. Miller ordered the Defiant to a safe distance, though safe was relative given the ship's condition. They watched as the most powerful fleet in the galaxy tore itself apart before their eyes. "Send a message to Earth," Miller ordered. "Tell them." He paused. the weight of the moment hitting him. "Tell them the Zarkonian fleet is being destroyed. The Earth is safe." As the words left his mouth, the command ship finally exploded in a blinding flash, sending a shockwave that accelerated the destruction of the remaining fleet. The wave hit the Defiant, shaking it violently, but not destroying the already battered vessel. When the light faded and the sensors cleared, Miller stared in disbelief at the scene before them. Where once the mighty Zarkonian fleet had threatened Earth, now only debris remained, scattered across space like a new asteroid field. The impossible had happened. One human ship had destroyed an entire galactic empire's fleet. The U.S. Defiant drifted slowly through the debris field that had once been the mighty Zarkonian fleet. The ship was barely operational, its hull breached in multiple places and sealed with emergency patches. Of the original crew of 120, only 43 remained. Captain Miller stood on the bridge, looking out at the destruction. His uniform was torn and stained with blood. Some his own, some from crew members he had helped drag to safety during the battle. "Rescue pod approaching, Captain," Frank reported, his voice hoarse from the smoke he had inhaled. "It's Susan and Alan." Miller felt relief wash over him. At least some of the boarding team had survived. "Bring them in," he ordered. When Susan and Alan arrived on the bridge, they were met with tired smiles and nods of respect. No one had energy for more. They had accomplished the impossible, but at a terrible cost. "Nancy?" Miller asked quietly. Susan shook her head. "She gave her life so we could place the final node." Miller nodded, adding another name to the list of heroes he would never forget. "And Lisa," he said, more to himself than to the others. She knew what would happen in that radiation chamber. "Their sacrifices saved Earth," Alan said. "Saved everyone." Miller turned to Frank. "Can we reach Earth Command?" Frank worked his console. "Communications are damaged, but functional. Sending now." After several tense minutes, the screen flickered to life. Admiral Garcia appeared, his face showing disbelief and hope. "Captain Miller, is that really you?" the Admiral asked. "Our sensors showed. We thought everyone was lost." "Not everyone, sir," Miller replied. "But we completed the mission. The Zarkonian fleet has been destroyed." The Admiral seemed unable to process this information. "Destroyed? The entire fleet? How is that possible?" "We'll explain everything when we return," Miller said. "Right now, we need to know, how bad are things on Earth?" The Admiral's face grew grim. "We lost millions, Captain. Cities destroyed, infrastructure damage. But thanks to you, we're still here. The planet is safe." As the Defiant limped back toward Earth at reduced speed, the crew began the slow process of repairs. More importantly, they began to heal. Some sat together in quiet groups, sharing stories of those they had lost. Others worked tirelessly, finding comfort in keeping busy. Miller spent hours writing personal messages to the families of crew members who hadn't survived. Each letter spoke of heroism and sacrifice, but the words felt hollow compared to the lives that had been lost. 7 days after the battle, as Earth finally came into view, the ship's long-range sensors detected something unexpected. "Captain," Susan called from her station, "I'm picking up multiple ships approaching from the Centauri system." The crew tensed, ready for another fight they couldn't possibly win in their current state. "They're not Zarkonian," Susan continued, surprise in her voice. "The design is completely different, and they're broadcasting on open frequencies." "Let's hear it," Miller ordered. A strange, melodic voice filled the bridge. "People of Earth, we come in peace. We represent the Free Worlds Alliance, planets once oppressed by the Zarkonian Empire. We have received word of your victory and wish to offer our thanks and assistance." Miller exchanged glances with his exhausted crew. "Put me through," he said to Frank. "This is Captain John Miller of Earth Ship Defiant. We welcome your friendship." As the Defiant approached Earth with the alien alliance ships beside them, Miller realized that the world they were returning to would never be the same. Humanity had not only survived its first contact with a hostile galactic power, They had defeated it against impossible odds. The technology developed by the Defiant's crew had changed everything. The quantum disruptor had proven that even the most powerful enemy could be vulnerable. Humanity would rebuild, but they would also look to the stars with new confidence. In the ship's memorial hall, Miller placed a simple plaque listing the names of those who hadn't returned. Below the names, he added a single line. They gave their lives not just for Earth, but for freedom throughout the stars. As the Defiant finally docked at what remained of Earth's orbital station, Miller knew that this was not an ending, but a beginning. Humanity's place in the galaxy had been established not through conquest, but through courage, sacrifice, and the refusal to surrender even when facing impossible odds. One ship had changed the fate of the galaxy forever.